Hello cyborgs! Today I'm going to tell you what my new favorite book of all time is. For those of you who've seen my mid-year book freakout tag, you already know what book I'm talking about, but for those of you who missed it and only saw my teaser at the end of another video, today I'm going to be talking with you about East of Eden by John Steinbeck. I read East of Eden primarily during the month of July, and I was buddy reading it with Kate Howe and also Karen, one of my long-term subscribers. I don't think they've quite finished it yet, but I'm certainly still interested in chatting with it about them, but I just couldn't wait to finish this because it was just absolutely freaking fantastic. Now, before I tell you why, I have to tell you the book haiku. Two brothers apart, dust and wind, secret readers, captured in few words. This book follows a few generations of two families, the Hamiltons and the Trasks, in Salinas Valley, California, which is where John Steinbeck grew up, and the Hamiltons, in fact, are based off of his actual family. At one point, John Steinbeck even pops in this book as a little kid, part of the Hamilton clan. The thing that impressed me so much about Steinbeck and his writing is that he was able to capture people and the psychology of people in the matter of 2 paragraphs. It was just insane how insightful and intuitive he was into how people's minds work and how their weaknesses develop, how they interact with other people that they love or don't love or are indifferent to. It was just amazing to read, especially from someone coming from a psychological background. I have a BA in psychology, and so when someone can truly capture the human mind and the many different ways that a human mind can exist in the world, and they can do it well and realistically and poetically, I couldn't have been a happier camper, hence this being my new favorite book of all time. There were passages in here that just took my breath away, and I didn't start underlining until halfway through the book, so that's definitely something I'm looking forward to doing, underlining more things when I eventually reread this lovely, lovely tale. In here you have some absolutely glowing characters. Samuel Hamilton is the patriarch of the Hamilton family. He has to hide his whiskey in his blacksmithing shed from his very religious and upstart wife. He loves reading books and he has to secretly buy them because his wife will get mad that he spent money on them. He's a sweetheart and really tries to make it that his community is safe and sound, even though his farm never really gets up and off and running. It never really has good soil. He's constantly only just making it by. He has a brood of lovely children, including Desi and Tom, who are 2 figures that really hit my heartstrings. Tom, for his prom, asks 2 girls to go with him, and since his older brother took like the horse and cart already, he straps their beloved like prized horsehair sofa to the horses and drags the sofa through town. His mother like never forgives him for it because it was her like prized possession in her, otherwise kind of downtrodden home, but he's just such a dreamer and such a romantic. Tom really, really hit me right there. There's also Will Hamilton, who's like the sensible one of the family. He goes into business, he's always making money, and he just doesn't understand why his family doesn't value him. They're a bunch of dreamers and they're a bunch of people who are fine with just getting by, and Will is like the provider and he secretly does all the things like paperwork, dealing with governments, dealing with taxes that they have no clue how to do, and he just does it quietly and no one thanks him, and he just has to deal with that at the end of the day. So you have these people that at first when you're reading this you're like, oh really, another character? Great, I'm never going to keep these people straight, but you do, because they end up all having something interesting to say, something about their lives that sets them apart from every other character in this book, and you find a way to connect with them even if they're nothing like you at all. Case in point, Kathy is our main antagonist in this. She's a psychopath and has no problems literally stepping over people to get her way in the world, but there's this point toward the end of the book, and I'm not spoiling it, but it has to do with her connection with the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. And the entire time I was reading this, I found her interesting and intriguing, but I wasn't connecting with her because you can't really connect with a psychopath. But then she talks about Alice, and my heart just broke. Some of my favorite characters in here, or my favorite relationships between characters, are between brothers. We've got Charles and Adam, and then Adam's sons, Caleb and Aaron, and the way that these brothers interact, because both sets of brothers are very different, people. They look different physically, and their behavior is as different as Moon and the Sun as well. The book kind of sets you up to pass judgment on like who's the better brother, so to speak. But by the end, you're so incredibly confused as to whose side you're on, so to speak. It's just wonderful that right when I thought that I had nailed a character down and decided if I liked them or didn't like them, Steinbeck added something different into the mix, and it had me rethinking all of the assumptions I had previously made before. There's a glorious character called Lee. He is Adam's household cook and housekeeper. He pretty much just keeps the family going because for one reason or another, Adam is just kind of not up to the task. Lee is a super interesting character, way more intelligent than he originally comes off at, and there's this really special part about Lee that you learn when he's talking with Samuel Hamilton. I'm not going to spoil it for you because it was so sweet and so lovely. He's just a really, really interesting character. He wasn't one of my favorites, but every time he was on the page, I was just like smiling on the inside. He's just so cool and so interesting, and oh my gosh. And finally, one of the youngest generations, there's Abra, who is like a neighbor to Caleb and Aaron Trask, and she is one of the most interesting female characters in this that isn't Kathy. Because I will say the only complaint that I have with East of Eden is that there are not nearly as many female characters in here as male characters, and of the women who are in here, most of them are prostitutes or the owners of brothels. So I'm not saying that obviously brothel owners and prostitutes are bad people or disreputable or anything like that. I know that people are all individual, and for one way or another, you get into that sort of business, one of the oldest businesses in human history. But it's certainly not a varied picture of women, am I right? Abra is one of the female characters that isn't Kathy and isn't a prostitute that you get to know quite a bit about. And she was really interesting, really smart, really stood up for herself, independent, exceptionally loving. I at first didn't like her at all, and then slowly over time as she grows up, you get to learn who Abra actually is as she gets to learn who she actually is. I need to pay better attention to her when I reread this because I did not give her nearly as much credit as I ought to at the beginning. She's just a really, really interesting character to look more deeply into. So now that I've told you a bit about the characters, I'm going to read to you a couple of passages that just took my breath away that I really liked, just so you get an idea about the writing style and see if it suits your tastes as well. So here's a passage where the narrator, assumably John Steinbeck, is addressing the reader directly. In uncertainty, I am certain that underneath their topmost layers of frailty, men want to be good and want to be loved. Indeed, most of their vices are attempted shortcuts to love. When a man comes to die, no matter what his talents and influence and genius, if he dies unloved, his life must be a failure to him and his dying a cold horror. It seems to me that if you or I must choose between two courses of thought or action, we should remember our dying and try so to live that our death brings no pleasure to the world. Just so beautiful. Live so that your death does not bring pleasure to the world. That's just, I've never heard it put that way before, and it's just absolutely beautiful. So here's a passage where the narrator is addressing the atrocities of World War I. The war, at first anyway, was for other people. We, I, my family and friends, had kind of bleacher seats, and it was pretty exciting. And just as war is always for somebody else, so it is also true that someone else always gets killed. And Mother of God, that wasn't true either. The dreadful telegrams began to sneak sorrowfully in, and it was everybody's brother. Here we were, over 6,000 miles from the anger and the noise, and that didn't save us. It wasn't much fun then, The Liberty Bells could parade in white caps and uniforms of white sharkskin. Our uncle could rewrite his 4th of July speech and use it to sell bonds. We in high school could wear olive drab and campaign hats and learn the manual of arms from the physics teacher. But Jesus Christ, Marty Hop's dead. The Burgess boy from across the street, the handsome one our little sister was in love with from the time she was 3, blown to bits. And the gangling, shuffling, loose-jointed boys carrying suitcases were marching awkwardly down Main Street to the Southern Pacific Depot. They were sheepish, and the Salinas band marched ahead of them, playing the Stars and Stripes Forever, and the families walking along beside them were crying, and the music sounded like a dirge. The draftees wouldn't look at their mothers. They didn't dare. We'd never thought the war could happen to us. I've got tears in my eyeballs and pricklies on my neck. For Cripe's sake, Steinbeck, you tell him. Here's another passage depicting the warfare of World War I. There is no dignity in death in battle. Mostly that is a splashing about of human meat and fluid, and the result is filthy, but there is a great and almost sweet dignity in the sorrow, the helplessness, the hopeless sorrow that comes down over a family with the telegram. Nothing to say, nothing to do, and only one hope. I hope he didn't suffer. And what a forlorn and last choice hope that is. And it is true that there were some people who, when their sorrow was beginning to lose its savor, gently edged it toward pride and felt increasingly important because of their loss. Some of these even made a good thing of it after the war was over. That is only natural, just as it is natural for a man whose life function is the making of money to make money out of a war. No one blamed a man for that, but it was expected that he should invest a part of his loot in war bonds. We thought we invented all of it in Salinas, even the sorrow. So not a huge portion of this book is taken up depicting World War I, but they were some of the more beautiful passages, and the passages that didn't have to do with any plot points for the characters, because I didn't want to spoil anything for you. Though I must say that this is a book that can't really be spoiled per se. I mean, you can spoil the fates of the characters, which of course I won't do here because Spoiler Fest is not on my head, but this book is just more of a journey, and it's very quiet, and it's poetic, and it's about people, and the differences between people, how people evolve, their places in the world, how communities change. And for that reason, I think this is kind of a hard book to discuss. I certainly have a really hard time articulating how I feel about it. I find the events of this book just hit me emotionally, and I have no time to think about them. I just feel them. And so it's really hard to talk about how you feel about things because you haven't necessarily been thinking about them. But there is so much material in here to think about. It's just that on my first reading, it was such a visceral read, I just connected with this book. So in the future readings that I'll be making of East of Eden, which I am so looking forward to doing, it's just going to be so much more in depth, so much picking up on foreshadowing or character traits that I missed out, realizing who the characters are before I get introduced to them, and it's just going to be such a fun time and such a ball. So I really hope that this rambly review has made you interested in picking up East of Eden. One last warning, I loved it halfway through. It took me until halfway through before I realized that I was loving what I was reading. This has the worst first chapter ever. It describes the land of Salinas Valley in great detail, and if I had been assigned to read this in high school, I would have just hit myself on the head with a wall. When reading chapter 1, I would have expected this to be so dry and uninteresting, but just please push through chapter 1 for sure and just keep moving. Just keep moving. And before you know it, you'll be enjoying yourself way more than you ever thought you could with East of Eden. I hope you enjoyed this review video and hearing a bit more about my new favorite book of all time ever in my entire life. It's very exciting to find this book. I never would have thought that East of Eden would be it, but it is so, and I'm just ecstatic. Thank you for watching. And until next time, I hope you give East of Eden a try, or at least put it on your to-read shelf on Goodreads, and continue to be lovely. You are an incandescent lunar moth. I'm so excited. That was not very sincere.